22 years. That's how long Robert Scott Clive has been missing. He was just 15 years old when he vanished on a cold December night in 2002. A kid, quiet, polite, known to friends and family simply as Scott. He left his home in North Shields, North Tyneside, just to pop out and visit a friend like he'd done so many times before. He was never seen again. No confirmed sightings, no messages, no body. For more than 2 decades, Scott's case drifted into the background, occasionally revisited by police, occasionally headlined in local papers. A name whispered in the northeast of England, a face on a missing poster that began to fade with time, until now, because something has changed. New evidence, fresh forensic searches, a house cordoned off and excavated, and perhaps most shocking of all, arrests. 2 men and a woman taken into custody in early 2025, over 2 decades after Scott's disappearance. The case of Robert Scott Clive has come roaring back to life, and what investigators believe happened to him changes everything we thought we knew. Let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what this case is really about and why it may finally be on the verge of being solved, we have to understand Scott, who he was, what kind of life he lived, what he feared, and what happened on the night he vanished, and maybe more importantly, who was the last person to see him. Because according to those who knew Scott best, he wasn't the kind of kid who just ran away. He didn't have a pattern of disappearing. He was quiet, respectful. He had plans to join the army when he turned 16. He also had secrets, and police now believe those secrets could hold the key to unlocking this case. For years, the theory was simple. Scott had gone missing near a river. He may have slipped, fallen, drowned, a tragic accident. His family was told to prepare for the worst, without ever being given answers. But that story never sat right with everyone. Scott's mother always believed her son didn't just vanish. She insisted something happened that night, something sinister. For 20 years, she never gave up hope that one day the truth would come out. In 2024, she was finally heard. A tip-off, undisclosed by police, led officers to a house on Coldstream Gardens, just minutes from where Scott was last seen. That house, they now say, may be the very place where Scott was assaulted and possibly killed. The house was ripped apart, floors taken up, gardens dug, forensic specialists combing every inch. Investigators even drained drains and used cadaver dogs. Something about that property demanded more than just another cold case review. And then came the statement. Police now believe Scott was assaulted the night he vanished. Not fell, not drowned, not ran away, but violently attacked. Suddenly it wasn't just a missing persons case anymore. It became something else. A suspected murder, with suspects still alive and still within reach. How does a case like this go cold for so long? And what happens when time catches up with the truth? We're going to walk you through Scott's life, the final hours before he disappeared, the police theories that shaped and in some cases derailed the investigation, and the unbelievable turn of events in 2024 and 2025 that may finally bring justice for a boy who never came home. Because there's one more detail you need to know before we begin. When officers returned to the scene 2 decades later, they didn't just search for remains. They brought a murder investigation unit. So if someone knows what happened to Scott Clive that night, now is the time to speak. And if they don't, we'll do everything we can to tell this story until the silence breaks. Before the headlines, before the search teams, before the sealed-off property and the cadaver dogs, there was just Scott, a boy like many others caught in the space between childhood and becoming a man. Robert Scott Clive, born in 1987, was known simply as Scott to those around him. A 15-year-old with shy eyes, a slim frame and a quiet demeanor. He lived in North Shields, a coastal town in North Tyneside, northeast England, just a few miles from Newcastle. North Shields was, and still is, a place of tight communities. Rows of terraced housing, local pubs and football pitches. People knew each other by name. Kids grew up playing in the same parks their parents had. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't dangerous, it was home. And for most families, including Scott's, it was enough. He lived with his mother and siblings. His father had passed away when he was younger, something that shaped Scott deeply. He didn't talk much about it, but those who knew him said there was a gravity behind his quietness. He was sensitive, thoughtful, kind. He wasn't the type of teenager who caused trouble. He didn't smoke, didn't drink, didn't hang around in gangs or get into fights. He wasn't particularly outgoing, but he had a close circle of friends. He liked video games, music, and like many boys his age, he had dreams that felt just out of reach, but not impossible. His biggest dream, to join the army. That was his plan. Scott had already begun speaking about enlisting once he turned 16. He'd talked to career officers, asked questions about training. It wasn't just a fantasy, it was something he'd made clear he wanted. A structured future, discipline, direction, a way out. People who saw him in the weeks before he vanished said he seemed upbeat, focused. He wasn't acting like someone who planned to run away. He had plans, anchors, roots. So when he vanished without a trace, the shock wasn't just that he disappeared. It was that he didn't seem like the kind of boy who ever would. The last day of Scott's life, or at least the last day anyone saw him, was December 13th, 2002. It was a Friday. The air was cold, damp, the kind of northeast winter that settles in your bones. Christmas was just around the corner. Lights were going up in the streets. Kids were counting down the days to the school holidays. That afternoon, Scott was at home in North Shields. He left the house around 5 p.m., telling his family he was heading out to visit a friend in nearby Howden. It wasn't far, about a 15 to 20-minute walk depending on the route. He knew the area well. He'd made the trip dozens of times before, but this time he never arrived, and he never came home. When his mother realized he hadn't returned by nightfall, she started calling around. Friends, neighbors, anyone who might have seen him. At first there was no panic. Maybe he was out late. Maybe he'd stayed longer than expected. But by the next morning, it was clear something was wrong. A missing persons report was filed, and just like that, the case of Robert Scott Clive began. At first, police weren't overly concerned. They treated Scott's disappearance as a potential runaway. It's a story we've heard before, especially with teens. He was 15 after all. Maybe he'd had an argument. Maybe he needed space. But Scott hadn't taken a bag. He hadn't packed clothes. He had no money with him, no bank card, no phone, no warning. And most telling of all, he hadn't told anyone, not even his closest friend. Within 48 hours, police realized this wasn't just a boy blowing off steam, and the search began in earnest. Posters went up across Tyneside. Police dogs were brought in. Local volunteers combed fields, parks, and abandoned buildings. Rivers and drainage channels were checked. It was one of the largest missing child operations in the region at the time. But nothing turned up. No clothing, no belongings, no confirmed sightings. And the only tip that came in, one that would shape the case for years, was this. A witness claimed to have seen a boy matching Scott's description near the Tyne River, not far from a footpath he may have used that night. Police leaned into that possibility. Could he have fallen in? Was it an accident? Divers were sent to search parts of the river. Sonar equipment was used. The muddy waters were combed, but nothing was found. Not a shoe, not a backpack, not a single item of clothing. Still, the theory stuck. Scott had vanished into the water, they said. The current might have carried him away. The body may never be recovered. It was tragic, but plausible. And yet his family never accepted it, because something just didn't add up. Scott was street smart, cautious. The riverbank in that area wasn't well lit. It wasn't the kind of place you'd wander into by mistake. And why would he even be near the water? It wasn't on the direct route to his friend's house. Scott's mother believed something else had happened. She pushed for more inquiries, more door-to-door searches, more forensic involvement. But the case slowly went cold. The weeks turned into months. The posters came down. The press stopped calling. And like so many other families of the missing, Scott's relatives were left in limbo, frozen between grief and hope. No closure, no body, no way to say goodbye. But then came the rumors. A local boy had said he saw Scott talking to someone that night. Someone older, a man. Police didn't confirm the detail, but whispers grew in the neighborhood. People started saying Scott had been lured into a house, that there'd been violence, that something had gone wrong, and then been covered up. There were even names attached, but without evidence. It was all just speculation. Still, for Scott's family, it was more plausible than the river, because they knew their boy, and they knew he didn't fall. In the years that followed, there were sporadic police reviews. Cold case detectives revisited files. Witnesses were re-interviewed, but nothing stuck, until something finally shifted. In 2023, police received new information. They haven't said what it was, at least not publicly. But whatever they learned was serious enough to reignite the case. Serious enough to assign a new investigative team. Serious enough to dig. Literally, they zoned in on a property on Coldstream Gardens in North Shields, just a few minutes' walk from Scott's home. That house became the focus of a full-scale forensic excavation. Floors torn up, walls analyzed, drains tested. For the first time in 2 decades, police weren't just searching. They were preparing for a murder inquiry. The new theory, that Scott never made it past that house, that he was lured inside, assaulted, possibly killed, and that someone, perhaps more than one person, has known this all along. Scott's story, like so many missing children's cases, isn't just about what happened. It's about what didn't happen. The questions that weren't asked, the leads that weren't followed, the voices that weren't heard. It's about a boy whose face was nearly forgotten, until now. December 13th, 2002. The day Scott Clive vanished. Within 48 hours, police had launched a missing persons case. But in those early days, the search was clumsy, narrow, lacking urgency. Officers leaned into a convenient theory that Scott had run away, a teenage boy acting out. But Scott's family knew better, and soon so did the community. By the end of the first week, local volunteers joined the search. People from the neighborhood, shop owners, teenagers from Scott's school. They scoured alleyways, searched along the River Tyne, checked under railway bridges and inside derelict buildings. It was winter in North Shields, cold, wet, and bleak, but the people didn't stop. Still, police held firm to the river theory. They believed Scott had likely taken a shortcut that led him near the water, that he'd slipped and fallen into the current. They deployed search teams, divers, sonar scans, even a helicopter. But the river turned up nothing, not a single trace, and that should have been the first red flag. Bodies or even belongings don't vanish without a trace. The currents of the Tyne are strong, but they don't erase people from the earth. And Scott was healthy, athletic, street smart. The river idea, while convenient, didn't line up with what people knew about him. Still, for a long time, that was the official line. The investigation stumbled. There were door-to-door inquiries in the early days, standard procedure. Detectives asked neighbors if they'd seen Scott that night. Some said no. Others remembered seeing a boy in a dark jacket, walking alone around 5:30 p.m. One older resident near Coldstream Gardens, just streets from Scott's house, claimed she heard shouting that evening. Male voices, raised, possibly a scuffle, but again there was no confirmation, no follow-up. The property at the center of those rumors, number 5, Coldstream Gardens, a semi-detached house, owned by a local family with known links to the community. Some called them reclusive, others said they were dangerous, and more than one person in the area claimed that house had a reputation, especially with younger kids. It was said to be a place where things happened: drugs, parties, fights, and people, especially vulnerable ones, ended up hurt. Scott's mother urged police to investigate that house in 2002. She begged them, but they didn't have a warrant, no probable cause, and without physical evidence or an eyewitness placing Scott there, the house remained just that: a house, not a crime scene. Months passed, then years, and the investigation grew cold. The file sat dormant for over a decade. Scott's name faded from the news cycle. Other tragedies filled the headlines. Other children disappeared. The world kept turning, but in the background something else was happening. Whispers, rumors, stories. People who once stayed silent began to speak, not publicly, but behind closed doors. They told friends, told priests, some told former detectives. They said Scott hadn't gone near the river at all. He'd been lured somewhere, trapped, and that there were people in North Shields who knew exactly what happened. One of those names kept coming up: the man who lived at number 5 Coldstream Gardens in 2002. A man with a long history of violence, assaults, intimidation, someone who knew how to silence people, and did. Police didn't act on those rumors back then, but in 2023 something changed. It wasn't just a tip, it was a statement, possibly even a confession. Northumbria police haven't released all the details, but they confirmed that new intelligence had reopened the case in full, and not just as a missing person. Now it was a homicide investigation. In September 2023, police returned to Coldstream Gardens, this time with a warrant, and not just to knock. They brought in cadaver dogs, forensic archaeologists, specialized forensic search teams trained in body recovery and trace evidence collection. The house was cordoned off, tents erected, cameras set up. Crime scene investigators entered the property wearing full suits. For weeks they pulled apart every wall, every floorboard, every inch of that house. Neighbors watched from their windows. Some were shocked, others weren't. The truth was, people had suspected that house for years. One resident told local reporters, "It's like we've all been living with a secret. Everyone knew something happened. We just didn't know how to prove it." And now police were proving it. They found evidence, enough to confirm foul play. They haven't said exactly what, only that materials were recovered that supported the theory that Scott Clive met with violence at the location. That includes suspected human traces found using ground-penetrating radar and chemical testing. Forensic samples were sent to labs. A full re-examination of the 2002 case file began, and police announced publicly that they now believe Scott was assaulted and possibly killed on the very night he disappeared. But the house wasn't the only clue. Alongside the excavation, detectives launched a public appeal. They urged anyone who had information, even rumors from decades ago, to come forward. Several new witnesses did. Some of those statements matched what Scott's family had been saying all along. One witness recalled seeing Scott enter Coldstream Gardens on the night of December 13th. Another claimed they heard someone crying inside the house. Another, a former associate of the main suspect, said Scott had been invited in but never walked out. This wasn't speculation anymore. This was a pattern, a timeline, a crime. By early 2024, police were preparing for arrests, and in March of that year they made their first move. Two men, both now in their 40s, were detained in connection with Scott's disappearance. One was arrested on suspicion of murder, the other as an accessory. Their names have not been released officially due to ongoing legal proceedings, but local sources believe both men lived in the area at the time of Scott's disappearance. They were questioned for several days before being released on bail pending further investigation. Police have confirmed they are pursuing charges, and with new forensic evidence now linking the house directly to Scott's last known whereabouts, a trial is not only possible, it's likely. But this is more than just a reopening. It's a reckoning. The entire investigation timeline, beginning in 2002, winding through years of silence and doubt, has been laid bare. Mistakes, missed leads, a family ignored. Had Scott's mother been listened to then, the truth might have come out 20 years earlier. But now at least the truth is fighting its way to the surface. After 22 years of silence, whispers and heartache, 2024 brought something Scott Clive's family had stopped daring to hope for: progress. Real, measurable progress. By early spring, Northumbria police publicly confirmed what many had long feared: they no longer considered Scott a missing person. They were now treating his case as a homicide. A senior detective, visibly emotional during a press briefing, admitted that significant and credible evidence had been uncovered in the forensic searches at Coldstream Gardens. And the timing wasn't random, because on March 14, 2024, just 3 days after the final phase of forensic work at the property, 2 men were taken into custody. One, a 44-year-old man believed to have been a teenager himself back in 2002. The second, slightly older, had a criminal history and a well-known presence in the neighborhood back in those days. Neither man's name was released, citing legal reasons and the sensitivity of the case. But inside the community of North Shields, people were talking. Whispers turned into names. Faces turned into timelines. And soon, social media lit up with speculation. Some said one of the suspects had been questioned in 2002, but let go without a thorough background check. Others remembered how one of them had a reputation for violence, especially toward younger kids. But what broke the silence entirely was not the arrests. It was Scott's mother. Standing in front of reporters, she spoke with the same clarity and heartbreak that had defined her for 2 decades. She said, "I never stopped looking for my son, I never gave up on him, and I never believed for 1 second that he ran away. Scott didn't leave us, someone took him. And now, the world's finally listening." She was surrounded by photos, pictures of Scott as a boy, smiling in his school uniform, standing in front of Christmas trees, laughing with his younger brother. She held up a shirt, Scott's favorite. It still smelled like him, she said. The press conference lasted only a few minutes, but it gripped the country. BBC, ITV and Sky News all ran segments. The Daily Mail ran a full-page feature with the headline, "He didn't just vanish. The Scott Clive case reopens after 22 years." And in it they revealed what police had been quietly investigating since the Coldstream Gardens excavation. The forensic evidence recovered was compelling. One item in particular changed everything. A carpet sample, removed from beneath floorboards in a sealed-off upstairs bedroom, contained blood. Tiny amounts, invisible to the eye, but enough. DNA testing matched it to a family member of Scott Clive. It was the first conclusive physical link between Scott and the house where he was last suspected to be seen. Even more chilling, forensic luminol testing on the surrounding area suggested extensive cleanup efforts had taken place shortly after December 13, 2002. Some materials had been replaced, others scrubbed, but the chemical traces told their own story. Blood had been spilled there, and someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to hide it. Scott's mother cried when police told her, not because it confirmed her worst fears, but because it confirmed what she had always known. He hadn't left them, he'd been taken from them, and someone for 22 years had gotten away with it. As the investigation ramped up, new details emerged from witnesses emboldened by the arrests. One woman, who'd been just 15 when Scott vanished, came forward and told police she remembered being threatened by one of the suspects in the days after the disappearance. She said he warned her not to ask about that Clive lad. Another man, previously too afraid to speak, claimed he'd seen Scott inside Coldstream Gardens the night he vanished. That Scott looked scared, that he heard yelling, and then silence. These testimonies were reviewed, cross-checked, and where possible, corroborated. And they painted a dark picture. It appeared Scott had gone to the house either voluntarily or under pressure. Some believe he may have been coerced, perhaps with the promise of something: help, friendship, safety. But once inside, something happened. A fight, an assault, possibly worse, and afterward silence. Police now believe Scott may have been killed that night, and that his body was either disposed of or hidden in a way that prevented discovery for decades. But there's more. Because while the focus remained on Coldstream Gardens, investigators quietly expanded their search radius. In May 2024, they revealed that a second site, several miles from the house, was being searched. An old industrial site, no longer in use, with deep drainage systems and underground shafts. It's there, police believe, Scott's remains may have been taken. Cadaver dogs indicated potential hits, and over the course of several weeks, excavation teams worked around the clock. Cameras were inserted into the shafts, soil samples were tested, bones were recovered, but none confirmed to be human. Yet, the work is ongoing. Still, in the eyes of Scott's family, and the public, momentum is finally on their side. A petition began circulating, demanding a formal inquiry into the original investigation. Thousands signed, arguing that police mishandled Scott's case from the beginning, that they failed to act when the evidence was fresh, that they let suspects walk away. And it wasn't just angry civilians saying it. Former detectives, now retired, spoke out in interviews. One said, "We didn't have the tools we do now. DNA, witness protection, psychological profiling, it's all better today. But that's no excuse. We missed things. We didn't take his mother seriously. And that may have cost us 2 decades of truth." In response, Northumbria Police issued a formal statement. "We acknowledge there were aspects of this case that, if handled differently, may have changed the course of the investigation. We are committed to full transparency as we move forward," and they are moving forward. The Crown Prosecution Service is currently reviewing the case files for potential charges. If DNA testing on the forensic evidence holds, and if witness testimony proves credible, a trial may begin as early as autumn 2025. For now, Scott's family waits for news, waits for justice, but not in silence, because for the first time in years, the story of Scott Clive isn't being buried, it's being told, loudly, clearly, completely. 22 years. That's how long Scott Clive's family waited for answers, for justice, for someone to finally say what they were too afraid to believe. Now, with arrests made, forensic evidence recovered, and a community no longer silenced by fear, we come to the hardest part of any cold case: the theories, the unanswered questions, and the reckoning. Because even with everything we know, Scott's story still holds mysteries, moments that don't quite line up, people who've stayed quiet, timelines that never fully closed. So let's walk through what might have happened that night in December 2002. Let's try to bring the pieces together, just like the police, the family, and thousands of supporters have tried to do for more than 2 decades. Here's what we know: Scott Clive left his home that evening in North Shields. He told his mother he was heading to a friend's house, but never said which one. Some witnesses say he was seen walking alone. Others claim he was with a small group of older teens, boys known for being rough around the edges. Later, a witness places him near Coldstream Gardens, a known problem house in the area. Then, nothing. No CCTV footage, no confirmed sightings, no phone records, just a void. So what are the leading theories? Theory 1. The coercion trap. This theory is the most widely accepted, especially by police. It suggests Scott was lured to Coldstream Gardens that night, coaxed by someone he trusted, or someone he feared. Once inside, an argument broke out. Perhaps he refused to join in something: underage drinking, a theft, or worse. Perhaps he was targeted deliberately. Police believe there may have been a physical altercation. He was hit, injured, possibly fatally. Then the panic set in. The people in the house, Some of them just teens themselves realized what they had done. Instead of calling for help, they cleaned up. They hid the body. They kept quiet. And for 22 years they stayed silent, protected by fear, by misplaced loyalty, or by sheer luck. Theory 2. The mistaken identity, a darker possibility. What if Scott wasn't the intended victim? Some suggest he may have walked into something he wasn't supposed to see. An exchange, a robbery, maybe a beating already in progress. And what if someone already on edge panicked and struck him down? This theory gained traction after a former neighbor claimed that Coldstream Gardens was involved in more than just petty crime at the time, that it was a hotspot for something bigger, drug activity, or worse. If Scott was in the wrong place at the wrong time, the consequences could have been fatal. Theory 3. The silence pact. There's a chilling aspect to this case, and it lies in the number of people who might have known. Over the years, police say they interviewed more than 150 individuals in connection with Scott's disappearance, but almost no one talked. Some moved away. Others denied ever knowing Scott. But the theory that haunts investigators is this, that more than one person knew exactly what happened and made a pact never to say a word, whether out of fear of jail, or retribution, or shame. This theory isn't about one killer, it's about a conspiracy of silence, and it might explain why it took over 2 decades for even a sliver of the truth to surface. Whatever the truth, what matters now is what comes next. The forensic evidence is strong. The DNA link from the house to Scott's family is a breakthrough. The suspects, still unnamed publicly, remain under scrutiny. And Scott's family, they're not waiting anymore. They're pushing, they're speaking out, and they're demanding justice. In June 2025, hundreds gathered in North Shields for a candlelight vigil. They held signs with Scott's photo. Some wore shirts with his name. A local choir sang. And at the end, his mother took the microphone and said, "We never had a funeral, we never got to say goodbye, but we're still here. And Scott's still here, in every one of you who refuses to let him be forgotten." It was powerful, raw, and for many watching online or in person, it felt like something had shifted. Because cold cases don't just freeze the investigation, they freeze time. They trap families in loops of grief, guilt, and longing. But this case, it's thawing. So here's the emotional truth. Scott was 17. He had dreams. He loved football, music, his younger brother. He should have gone to college. He should have had his first heartbreak. He should have grown up. Instead, someone took that from him. And for 22 years they lived their life while Scott's remained frozen. Until now. Because someone finally spoke. Someone finally searched. Someone finally listened. And now, justice, while slow, is walking steadily toward the truth. And this is where you come in. Yes, you, the viewer, the listener, the person still here, watching at the 25-minute mark. Because in cases like this, it's not always the police who solve them. It's people. It's a neighbor who remembers something strange. It's a former friend who feels guilty. It's someone who's tired of staying silent. So if you know anything about what happened to Scott Clive, if you lived near Coldstream Gardens, if someone confessed to you in a moment of weakness, if you've stayed quiet, thinking the moment had passed, the time is now. You can speak anonymously. You can do it through Crime Stoppers. You can reach out to Northumbria Police. You can help a family finally bury their son, with dignity, with truth, with justice. And even if you don't know anything, share this story. Keep Scott's name alive. Because stories like this only disappear when we let them. But as long as people keep watching, keep asking, keep caring, then Scott Clive will never truly vanish. Thank you for joining us. If this story moved you, consider liking, subscribing, and sharing this video. We have many more cold cases coming, and with your help, maybe the next one we tell will be the one that finally finds the truth. Until next time, stay safe, and never stop seeking answers.